There's another leaker in the White House, and this time he spilled the calendar. I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now with my friend Bill Whittle. And Bill, it's hard to miss this in the headlines these days, but somebody in the White House apparently turned over quite a few days of calendar, for in fact, every day since the midterm election, belonging to the executive office and President Trump's activities to the website Axios. And the big headline grabber from that's being gleaned from this is that President Trump spends a relatively vast amount of time in unstructured executive time. And I'll get to that in a minute, Bill. But first, I just want to ask you, we hired this president because he said he was a great business person, and his track record certainly indicated he'd made a lot of money. And theoretically, he was going to bring some business discipline to the White House. But once again, we have somebody on the inside who is handing over private information, and in some people would argue national security risk involved here, to the press. What does this say about President Trump's leadership when those that close to him are distributing willy-nilly the stuff that's supposed to be private?
I don't know. I don't know. All I can tell you is that people of character who disagree with the president don't do these kind of things. General Mattis didn't leave and then sign a tell-all book deal, and he didn't release his private memos of his conversations with Donald Trump or any of that stuff. I don't know what people like this are trying to do when they release things like this. If it were, let's just look at the at one possible explanation for this. If I was a White House staffer and I was convinced that President Trump was essentially an imbecile who did nothing but sit around and watch TV all day, then my response to this would not be to leak details of his calendar. My response to this would be to go on television and say it is an enormously difficult and in fact horribly burdensome duty that I'm about to perform, but I have to tell you, as a person who has been deep inside the White House, my loyalty to the president and as my employer as well as my president is superseded by my loyalty to the country and my concern for its future. And then I would say what I was going to say. When you simply leak a calendar that shows a lot of essentially unstructured executive time, what does that say? I mean, are you just trying to use hints and innuendo to say that President Trump spends most of his time basically taking his own counsel? If that's what you're saying, that he takes his own counsel, then I don't see that as a particular big problem. If, on the other hand, you think that the man is incapable of holding office, then you should have the courage to come out and say so and say why.
Actually, some of the people who've commented privately have actually said the president spends a great deal of time in phone calls, that he's talking to a lot of other people.
Imagine that.
And there have been White House sources that basically say this president is creative. He's different than other presidents. He's one of the most, and the White House line is basically, this is one of the most productive, if not the most productive president in the history of the presidency game. And that specifically why they have in the calendar all this unstructured time is because they don't want everybody in the White House to know exactly what President Trump is doing at all times. And so essentially they're cloaking some of his schedule that way.
Well, it's not just cloaking the schedule. I said, when I said what I just said, I said as one example, in other words, let's take the example that this is a legitimate concern and so on. If I'd had the legitimate concern, I've just said what I would have done if I'd had that kind of concern. Now let's look at the other side of the coin. To say that he's spending essentially unstructured executive time, to me, this was certainly my first instinct when I heard the sentence. I haven't heard it before just now. To me, that says, oh, so he's set aside time to get work done. Is that what you're saying? Is Axios saying that he's set aside time to actually get work done rather than to have meetings about getting work done? Is it mean that he set aside time to get work done rather than, celebrating, National Kiwi Fruit Day? What exactly is the downside of unstructured executive time, or whatever the expression was? I I don't imagine that if you were to look at Donald Trump's schedule as an executive, or for that matter, if you were to look at the schedule of any other successful business executive, I suspect you'd find something that looked very similar all across the board. And once again, it's an effort to simply to it's one of these how many Donald Trumps can dance on the head of a pin, Scotty? How many scandals can you put on the head of a pin? Anything.
Well, Axios had a sidebar story. Let me just say that comparing President Trump's use of time with the information that they had about President Obama, President George W. Bush, President Bill Clinton. And basically, they said the way Trump's time is scheduled, it reminds them most of the way President Clinton was in the early parts of his presidency when he was extraordinarily undisciplined, hanging out too long at the rope line, pressing the flesh and showing up late for events.
Becoming popular, in other words.
Yeah. President Obama had a relatively disciplined schedule. He came in at a certain time every day, left at a certain time, had scheduled evening meetings, was out of town on a schedule. And President George W. Bush, it may not surprise you to know, was up at dark 30, had a cup of coffee with Laura, and then hit it until he was done with work, and then got on his stationary bicycle. But President Bush was scheduling his time in 10-minute increments. So a 20-minute meeting was called 2 increments, and extraordinarily disciplined. Do you feel more comfortable having somebody who's got that sense of personal discipline in the White House, or somebody who plays fast and loose with it?
I'm certainly not reassured by the idea that the president has his entire day, or not just day, his entire upcoming months plotted to the 10-minute increments. I mean, if you don't know what's going to happen in a meeting, how can you? I have a lot of affection for President Bush and respect for him, but I mean, I find that to be pretty ridiculous, to be honest with you. This is going to be a 20-minute meeting. I'm going to give you 2 segments of time. Well, what if it's more important than that? What if it's less important than that? You cannot have that kind of rigidity and run this thing like it's a computer program. The more flexibility you have, the more effective you can be as a president, I think. And just because Barack Obama came in on time and went out on time doesn't mean he got anything done when he was actually there. There's that picture that went around, and I'm sure to some degree it was cherry picking, but when Trump was elected, there was a picture of Donald Trump's desk at the White House, the Resolute desk. This is about a week after he became president, I want to say. Just cluttered with papers and stacks of papers, and they contrasted it with a picture of Obama, and there was essentially nothing there, or one piece of paper there, or something like that. Once again, it seems to me that this is an attempt to try and discredit Donald Trump by any means possible, by people who, if they were in fact on the inside, have, I think, an obligation to either put up or shut up. I think if you are employed by anybody, forget the President of the United States, but that's about as high up the chain as you can go. If you're employed by anyone, the fact that you're employed by them means that they are deserving of your loyalty. And if you're a person of any character at all, you need to express and maintain that loyalty. And the only thing that should trump that loyalty, if you'll pardon the expression, the only thing that should supersede your personal loyalty to the person who's employed you and hired you should be something that is of a magnitude that is greater from a moral point of view. In other words, I have a great deal of loyalty to people who I work with, and at the same time, I have a very high degree of patriotism for this country. And if I felt that my loyalty was endangering the country, then I would put my loyalty aside in favor of the higher purpose. And that's what a person of character would do. This certainly appears to be what General Mattis did. He disagreed with the president, and he basically said, "Sir, I disagree with you. You're the president. You make the decisions. This is how it works. I've enjoyed my time here. Thank you very much." And that's how honorable people do these things. So whenever I hear about a leak, the second I hear the word leak, I instantly suspect a rat, because I don't think people of character leak things.
This is how bad that gets. The guy who just wrote the recent tell-all Inside the White House memoir, Team of Vipers, I read a quote from him in a news story today where he said, Oh, this is too far. You don't release the president's calendar to the
You've
media.
got to be
I'm
joking.
totally serious.
Really?
Yes, yeah. So let me turn this around a little
Methinks
bit,
the
though.
rat doth protest too
That's
much.
right. Let me turn this around. And, I've mentioned before that Tom Peters of In Search of Excellence fame once said that, nobody thinks of Winston Churchill as the guy who brought World War II in on time and under budget. President Trump's results, whatever you think of, whether you agree with them or not, have been fairly substantial. Do you think that Americans are too trained, perhaps by their, Austrian background, public schooling regimen, and industrial processes that value seat time and clock hours over results, that this is bound to play against the president with the public because they're all trained to think, well, what's the guy doing for 7 hours?
I'd love to tell you that that were the case, Scotty, but we know that Barack Obama played more golf in 1 year than George Bush did in 8, or something along those lines, right? So when President Obama was out there on the links, and he was out there on the links a lot, we weren't hearing from the press that this is a sign of flexibility and good management style and stress reduction, all the rest. We just simply didn't hear anything about it. If Donald Trump had spent as much time golfing as Barack Obama had been golfing, we would have seen it on the news every single day. And this partisan uh, bias is something that is so ingrained that it's actually almost impossible to see the full details of it. It makes me wonder how Donald Trump's approval rating would be, what would have happened in the last midterm elections, all number of examples, what our international standing would be if he was given the same level of respect in terms of what the mainstream media gave to Barack Obama, who I watched over 8 years and saw nothing happen. And not only did nothing happen, things could have been happening, should have been happening, didn't happen. Economy should have been growing and we should have been getting wealthier, and it didn't. Military should have been getting stronger and it didn't. It got weaker. All of this stuff happened on a very regimented, extremely predictable, very dignified schedule. You had a person who came in the morning, essentially had policies that got nothing done, and then he went home again on schedule. And everybody fell down in the media. They fell down and worshiped him and put the halo around his head and worshiped him as the golden calf. I'm not concerned with what the president does with his day. It's none of, I won't say it's none of my business, but I will say it's not what I hired the man for. I'm more concerned with the output of the office rather than the schedule of the office or the input of the office. And if you look at the output of the office of the president under Donald Trump, I think it's been very solid. I'd give it a B plus, certainly a B, if not a B plus. And furthermore, if we have another court appointment to not only fill but is actually filled, then his legacy will last a lot longer than whether or not he's reelected in 2020. The the left has to rule by the courts because you only have to convince 5 people about this bad idea, rather than 150 million of them. And so, to defang the activism of the court, which he's done pretty well so far with his first 2 appointees, if he gets to replace a very liberal justice with a conservative or even a center right moderate, that legacy is worth whatever little sniping shots that people want to take at this president. I don't find this to be of equal weight. If you're trying to say, hey, the president spends a lot of time with nothing to do but sit around and work on the phone, okay. On the other hand, 3 Supreme Court justices, conceivably, maybe more. ISIS is gone, 4 or 5% economic growth, record low unemployment all across the board, especially in minority communities. North Korea is not launching those missiles anymore. We're not giving parcels of cash to the Iranians. The embassy's been moved to Jerusalem where it belongs, and on and on and on and on and on. So once again, the left is trying to, they're waiting for that moment, I think, when Republicans wake up and realize what a rotten, lazy, stupid, arrogant, gross, vain, vulgar, nasty, disgusting person Donald Trump is, at which point we will all rise up in arms and say, my God, what have we done? No. We knew who and what Donald Trump was when we elected him, and I think most people who elected him uh, are overall pretty satisfied with what he's done. I'm certainly satisfied with it. I don't like the optics of it. There are many things he does that I think are a little embarrassing, but that's I don't live in a world where I get to have a perfect president. We had a person who looked like they were going to be the perfect president in Mitt Romney. I mean, whatever you think about Romney being a rhino and all of that stuff, just put that aside for a second and just look at the man as a Republican candidate. If there was ever a person in my entire history of American history and the presidency, there's never been a person who looked like and acted like the president of the United States from central casting like Mitt Romney. Mitt Romney looked like Hollywood's vision of the president of the United States. He's exceedingly smart. He was successful. He had a great background. He built all of his money up from the ground up. He looked elegant and refined. He spoke in such a manner. He was absolutely, by every measure, the perfect American president in terms of the exterior image. And the Democrats turned him into a monster. He gave people cancer. He wanted to ship women to China or put them in binders or whatever the hell else they did. So if that's the way you want to play, and it is, then we won't run somebody with decorum, because we know what happens when we run people with decorum. And that was Mitt Romney, by the way. You can add Brett Kavanaugh to that list, which is Romney squared or cubed. And you begin to see, okay, this is how they're going to treat candidates. They're going to demonize good people, Romney and Kavanaugh. Whatever you think about them as individual politicians, I think their character is pretty near sterling as I've ever seen anyway. And if you're going to destroy these people by mudslinging, you leave us with no choice but to elect people who not only don't care about the mudslinging, but they're perfectly comfortable in the mud and know how to throw the mud back.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we recorded the first episode of Bill Whittle now in the middle of September 2018, and the one we just finished recording here is episode number 100. That would not have been possible without the members at BillWhittle.com, who have been faithful contributors and supporters of this effort, many of them for years. We are incredibly grateful to you. I think we probably have 100 more or so under our belts that will be coming up in 2019.
100,000 more, because the news never stops.
That's right. And so we want to just express our appreciation to the members at BillWhittle.com and invite those who have not yet become part of their storied ranks to do so by going to BillWhittle.com and clicking Become a Member. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making 100 episodes of Bill Whittle Now.